Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another Mandalorian discussion episode. So, I've gotten some feedback from quite a few of you actually saying that you really enjoy this series and that you look forward to my discussions every week, which is great because I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. We're definitely going to finish out the last 3 episodes of Season 1, then of course later move to Season 2 with some videos in between. Now, today's video isn't actually sponsored by Veet Ramen, although they do sponsor most of my Mandalorian videos, and that's because I'm planning a second, probably more in-depth video later in the next couple of days, where I'll talk about where I think the series is going heading into the last 3 episodes of Season 1. Today, however, I want to keep it pretty simple, do a light review / breakdown of Episode 5, what I thought, what I noticed, and what I think will be coming next time. So, with last episode, I think I titled the video in a way that was confusing for some of you. I specifically said, was this the first bad episode? And my conclusion was, no, I don't think so. In fact, I thought Episode 4 was a really strong episode. I really enjoyed it. I thought the characters overall were great, and it was a nice one-off adventure to go to a different planet and do something sort of away from the overarching story that was set up in episodes 1 and 3. And we certainly got more of that this episode. The Mandalorian, spoiler alert, goes to Tatooine and meets a wannabe bounty hunter who needs some help with a difficult job. And that's basically it. The Mandalorian leaves Baby Yoda with the mechanic. He helps the bounty hunter, but is double-crossed and eventually kills the young man. This, in my opinion, to get straight to the point, was probably the weakest episode of the series. I still really enjoyed this episode, but compared to the others, I found that the real strength was not in the plot or how the plot made me feel, but rather the world building, the atmosphere, the special effects, and although I hate to say it, perhaps some reliance on nostalgia. Of course, visiting Tatooine again is an interesting experience for any Star Wars fan, and I think they really nailed the planet in this episode. It almost looks like they used the exact same shots or maybe matte paintings from episode 4 to show Mos Eisley. Then of course we go to the town and we see a unique blend of prequel and OT style. That is, in my opinion, one of the best things this series has done. Taken the things we've seen in the prequel trilogy and giving them an original trilogy feel. We've gotten that a bit with the Kamino cloners and the Baby Yoda. We've got that, of course, with the super battle droids, and now we've got that with the pit droids, who of course appeared in episode 1 and, close to my heart, the episode 1 racer video game. The owner of a pit droids is an unnamed woman. I'll just call her the mechanic. I've seen a little bit of criticism in the few minutes that the video's been up of her acting, some saying she hammed it up a little bit too much. I'm not sure if I agree. I think she was certainly serviceable. Nothing like the waitress from last episode, but I do think moving forward, the directors should try to make sure that actors don't go too far into the sort of exaggerated 70s Star Wars acting. Although it did work back then, I don't think it necessarily stands up to modern audiences, and certainly in some cases, again, the waitress from last episode, it goes past the cheesiness that we even saw in the original trilogy. Moving forward though, I think one complaint that people will levy against this episode, particularly if they're not Star Wars fans, is the sort of degree and the level of callbacks. Besides for just visiting the planet of Mos Eisley, the Mandalorian lands in a similar looking docking bay, he walks through a very similar looking part of town, and of course he goes in what appears to be Chalum's Cantina, the same one from A New Hope. As he's doing this, we see lots of Tatooine regulars, including my favorite droid of all time, Treadwell. Either way, I personally didn't mind it. I thought it was cool to see the cantina. It certainly had a different looking crowd than it did in the original trilogy. It's probably went through some ownership changes, but what I would have liked to see is maybe a bit more character to Mos Eisley. More aliens, more sort of background dressing. It would have been cool if he walked through a market or something. Just give us an opportunity to look at some cool costumes and droids. In the cantina itself, we get the wannabe bounty hunter and a little bit more world building, some mentions of the Mid-Rim, the New Republic, and the target for today's episode, Fennec Shand, who is not, to my knowledge at least, a pre-existing character. Fennec Shand, however, is a badass, so somewhat out of the goodness of his heart, and also given a want for money, the Mandalorian agrees to help this want-to-be bounty hunter. From this point on, they head out into the Dune Sea, and I think we'll get one of the other complaints about this episode, the fact that that the Mandalorian was not with Baby Yoda. And I want to talk more about Baby Yoda in another video. I love the character, everyone loves the character, but I don't think it's necessary for him to be with the Mandalorian every second of every episode. It worked, for example, in episode 2 when we were still getting to know the character and he followed the Mandalorian while he was chasing the Jawas. But I think it's better in this episode he wasn't forced into a sidekick role, because I think it would be way too easy to just rely on him to carry the show. He's so cute, he's so almost charismatic and funny despite being just a doll. So it's really going to be a test of restraint, I think, with how much each episode uses him. And this episode, I think, nailed it, given the context, although it was a bit weird that the Mandalorian just sort of left him aboard the ship and the child just, well, walked out. That wasn't really very careful of him. Continuing though, the bits on the Dune Sea I think were the coolest part of the episode. They were filmed in a really interesting way. I don't think the scene with the Tusken Raiders was really necessary, but it takes us to the shootout and the capture of the target. And I think we're seeing one of my main problems with this episode in that not a lot happens. Now, arguably not a lot also happened in episode 2 or episode 4. However, what we did get in those two episodes was a bunch of character development. Episode 2 showed us the Mandalorian sort of putting himself in the place of Baby Yoda, developing that early paternal bond, and Baby Yoda putting his neck out for the Mandalorian. We see that bond partially comes from the Mandalorian's experience during the Clone Wars, and in episode 4 we saw the Mandalorian's sort of conflict between wanting to live as a Mandalorian and wanting to live as, well, an ordinary person. However, in this episode we don't really get anything for either of the main characters. The Mandalorian helps somebody, he sort of shows his soft side and shows his willingness to help an up-and-comer, but that's basically it, and I don't think that is enough to carry a whole episode. Basically, everyone he meets dies or certainly won't be in the show later on, and the main problem is that I really feel like for this episode especially that it could have done with an extra 20 minutes. We see a mysterious figure at the end. I really think this episode should have began their plot. This would have been a great one to be an hour long. Keep the first 35 minutes as it was, then move on to the show's second arc with whatever presumably happens in the next episode. But let's talk about that. The Mandalorian has his ship fixed and he leaves the planet. However, the last shot shows somebody approaching the body of Fennec. Now, certainly there is some ambiguity here. Could it be Boba Fett? A lot of people thought yeah, because the last place we saw him was Tatooine, and I guess it's just a mysterious figure. However, I think much more clearly it's Moff Gideon. We know that he wears a cape. Let's be honest, he's an Imperial, so he probably wears knee-high boots. And we know that the Empire is definitely after the Mandalorian. Could it be somebody else? Certainly. It could be Boba Fett. I think that's unlikely. It could be another party, but I think it's probably Moff Gideon, who will probably be the antagonist for the finale of this season. I think if I were planning the episode out, what I would do, as I mentioned, is keep everything the same, have Moff Gideon properly introduced, and have a full attack by the Empire on the Mandalorian. Really set the stakes for the rest of the episode moving forward, which the next episode, episode 6 through 8, can really dive into. Now, am I worried about this season and whether it will do anything and keep us hooked? No, because it already has me hooked after 5 episodes, and there's more than enough time to take us to at least a cliffhanger. What I'm just not happy with is the fact that this episode could have been much better, and it's sort of just treaded water. Making the matters worse, I think, is the fact that the same criticism can be made against the last episode. Again, we did see character development, but the overarching plot didn't move forward a whole lot. That is something we might have to come to expect. This is supposed to be like an old serial. However, as fans, we do expect to see some sort of coherent structure throughout the whole show, and I do think we will get it. Let me make that clear. I've got my ideas for what I think the last few episodes will look like, and I'll detail that in a later video, but overall, I just thought this was a pretty weak episode. The acting was fine. I thought the actual directing and the cinematography was great. It was really cool to see Mos Eisley. It was awesome that they managed to replicate this sort of feel and vibe that the original trilogy gave us, even better than the prequels did. However, I think a truly great episode needs a little bit more than that to be elevated to the next level. That is, however, just my opinion. Personally, I would put the episode at the worst of all 5, but still pretty good and certainly enjoyable. Not bad, but not near its potential. What do you guys think though? How would you rate this episode compared to the prior 4? Is it your favorite, your least favorite? What was your favorite part? What was your least favorite part? I look forward to hearing all of that and more down in the description. Until next time though guys, this has been Eckhart's Ladder. Have a great day, and until our paths cross, may the Force be with you. Sorry, this is Eck popping in after the outro because I realized I forgot to talk about all things the space battle. I thought it was great. The Mandalorian is absolutely not going to have traditional space battle scenes, and something like this fits perfectly. The show is meant to be sort of a Western, so having the space battles just feel different than ordinary Star Wars, I think is right. It's hard to explain really what they did to make the space battle feel the way it did, and I know I'm saying the word feel a lot, but there was a sort of desperate and rough quality to it that I really liked. The first thing I thought of immediately when I watched it was some of the content being produced by Howard Day, who makes his own Star Wars models and is animating them. For some reason, both have a really similar quality that I find difficult to put my finger on. If you can identify what it is, please let me know down below. Anyway, for real this time, roll the outro.